At my own brother's awards ceremony, security stopped me. "Ma'am, you're not on the list," they said. My brother Ethan smirked at his wife. "My sister is just a useless desk jockey. She should have married a real officer." He had no idea my desk job was about to save his life and destroy his pride on the exact same day. My name is Sophia Hayes. I am 34 years old, and on this brilliant May morning, the very air I breathed felt like a prelude to familiar betrayal. It came on the salty wind as I drove over the majestic Chesapeake Bay Bridge, heading toward the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. The stoic red brick walls seemed to hum with whispers of honor, discipline, and a very specific masculine brand of duty. I watched the proud military families stroll across immaculate green lawns, their sons and daughters standing like statues in pristine dress whites. A quiet, complicated knot of pride for my younger brother Ethan tightened in my chest, a feeling I had learned to temper over the years. I knew my role today, the supportive older sister, the quiet footnote in the grand story of the family hero. At the main security checkpoint, I wore a simple beige trench coat, deliberately chosen to conceal the crisp uniform beneath. A young petty officer took my ID, scanning the guest list on his tablet. He looked up, confused. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I don't have a Sophia Hayes on the guest list for Lieutenant Hayes." He showed me the screen: Captain David Hayes, Mrs. Margaret Hayes, and Mrs. Jessica Hayes. The absence of my own name was louder than any of theirs, not an oversight, but a deliberate act of erasure. As if summoned, my family's gleaming black SUV pulled up. Ethan emerged in his perfectly tailored dress whites, looking every inch the conquering hero. He saw me standing there with the apologetic guard, and a slow, knowing smirk played on his lips. Instead of vouching for his sister, he leaned toward his wife Jessica and said, his voice carrying clearly, "Probably some paperwork mix-up. She should have married a real officer instead of playing with spreadsheets." The cruelty was breathtaking. My mother Margaret suddenly found her antique pearl brooch fascinating, hands fluttering in theatrical avoidance. My father David, a retired captain, simply scowled, not at the insult, but at the public scene his daughter was causing. They walked past the checkpoint, leaving me behind like misplaced luggage. The young petty officer, trapped in this family drama, began to speak. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." I didn't argue. I simply stood there, rigid, and watched them disappear into the hallowed grounds that had rejected me on their command. In that moment of profound abandonment, the hurt crystallized into something else entirely, a decision as cold and hard as steel. Standing there as an outcast at the gate, I felt the present dissolve, unlocking a vault of memories. The cool, controlled woman I was now faded, replaced by the ghost of a teenage girl forever standing outside a circle of light. The first memory surfaced from the day Ethan's acceptance letter to the academy arrived. My father had thrown a massive backyard barbecue, inviting every retired and active duty officer within 50 miles. He stood by the grill, arm draped around Ethan's shoulders, introducing him repeatedly as the heir to the Hayes legacy. My mother brought out a huge sheet cake reading, "Congratulations, future Admiral." It wasn't just a party, it was a coronation. That same week, I had won a National Science Fair award for a complex cryptographic algorithm. I found my father by the fireplace that evening, approaching tentatively. "Dad, I won," I whispered, holding out the medal. He barely glanced up from his newspaper. "Good job, sweetie," he murmured automatically, handing it back. "I was just thinking Ethan needs a serious training regimen for pleb summer." The subject had returned to Ethan, as always. Years later, when I announced my acceptance into the Naval Intelligence Program, my father's face hardened. "Intelligence? That's a support role, Sophia. It's for people who can't make it in combat. The Hayes family are not support staff." My mother's placating words, "Perhaps it's safer for her that way," were meant as comfort but felt like daggers. They saw my choice not as strategic warfare fought with intellect, but as a deviation from their path of glory. The bitter irony is that my family thinks I play with spreadsheets in a beige cubicle. They know nothing of the place we call the tank, a classified facility buried deep underground, shielded from electronic eavesdropping. The air is cold, recycled, carrying the hum of powerful servers. No windows, only giant curved walls of screens showing glowing maps, drone feeds, and cascading code. This was my office, my battlefield. I remember one particular night coordinating a high-risk hostage rescue in the Red Sea. A civilian oil tanker had been boarded by pirates, with a dozen lives hanging in the balance. Viper 1. Confirm target location. You are 2 mics out, I said into my headset, voice calm despite the adrenaline. On the main screen, thermal imaging showed heat signatures, 7 hostiles, 12 hostages. The lives of a SEAL team depended on my next commands. At peak concentration, my personal phone vibrated. A text from Ethan. Enjoying your weekend in DC? Hitting the museums, I bet. Don't work too hard on those reports, sis. The condescending nickname felt like a knife twist. Here I was in a life-or-death struggle, and in his world, I was his boring sister drowning in paperwork. I powered off the phone and refocused. A flicker of movement caught my eye. An unlit fishing boat approaching from the stern. 6 more heat signatures, armed. An ambush. Viper 1. Abort. You have a secondary hostile force approaching from your 6. They're walking you into a kill box. My split-second analysis had just saved their lives. Hours later, at 3 a.m., I returned to my empty Washington apartment. I poured Kentucky bourbon and stood by the window, thinking about the men of Viper 1. Teammates whose faces I'd never see, whose thanks I'd never hear. My family thought I pushed paper. They had no idea those papers held the fates of nations. Hope arrived unexpectedly in General Miller's corner office at the Pentagon. 2 days after the Red Sea operation, he summoned me. You look exhausted, Sophia, he said, using my first name unusually, handing me coffee. It was a simple gesture that felt monumental. You saved 12 lives the other night, and the lives of the entire SEAL team, he stated. The official report won't have your name on it, but I know, and the president knows. You should be proud. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as Captain Hayes's daughter or Ethan's overshadowed sister, but as Sophia. That felt like enough. The Joint Chiefs have been discussing Operation Blackwater, he continued. It's time we started recognizing our heroes in the shadows. The Department of the Navy has officially nominated you for the Distinguished Service Medal. The Distinguished Service Medal, one of the highest non-combat honors, reserved for senior officers displaying exceptional service in positions of great responsibility. I was stunned into silence as he referenced my career's classified accomplishments. An unfamiliar emotion swelled in my throat. Driven by the unexpected safety of this space, I heard myself confess. Sir, my own family thinks I have a desk job. They think I push paper. I expected sympathy, perhaps pity. Instead, General Miller leaned back and let out a deep, booming laugh. Not of ridicule, but of pure delight at the cosmic irony. A desk job, he roared, shaking his head. Well then, I think we ought to give them the biggest surprise of their lives. He paused, a master strategist seeing a new move on the board. Your brother's awards ceremony is next month at Annapolis, isn't it? I nodded, confused. How poetic would it be to recognize 2 of Captain Hayes's children on the same day for 2 very different but equally vital forms of service to this nation? His words bloomed in the barren landscape of my hope. A wild, audacious idea took root, that my truth could finally be brought into the light, not by desperate explanations, but by the undeniable official recognition of the United States Navy. The thought was terrifying and intoxicating. The seed of hope General Miller planted felt fragile, but my memory immediately conjured the ghost of last 4th of July, a perfect reminder of why such hope was dangerous. The scene replays like a worn home movie. My parents' sprawling backyard in suburban Virginia, heavy with smoky scents of burgers on my father's oversized grill, an American flag waving proudly, a blue cooler sweating in the afternoon sun. A picture-perfect Rockwellian painting of family and patriotism, where I was just background scenery. The true focus was Ethan, holding court on the freshly stained deck, regaling a rapt audience with tales from his Persian Gulf deployment. It was a good story, full of roaring engines and split-second decisions. It was also about 80% fiction. I knew this because I had read the classified after-action report. In reality, he was a supporting character, but here he had given himself the starring role. Later, my mother caught my arm. "Come help me in the kitchen, dear." This was her signature move, the gentle summons for a not-so-gentle critique. In the cool kitchen, she pulled potato salad from the refrigerator. "You see Jessica out there? She just knows how to take care of Ethan. A career is wonderful, Sophia, but you mustn't forget about your own happiness. My friend Carol's son Mark, he's an orthopedic surgeon, very successful, very handsome, and finally single again." Each word was a tiny, perfectly aimed dart. It wasn't about my happiness, it was judgment, a declaration that my life was fundamentally incomplete. My career wasn't a source of pride but a temporary placeholder for the only event that truly mattered in a woman's life: marriage. "That's very thoughtful, Mom, but I'm happy," I said, the lie thin and brittle between us. When we returned to the patio, Ethan was louder, his confidence amplified by beer and fawning attention. He spotted me and draped a heavy arm over my shoulders. "Hey sis, I've been meaning to ask, when are you going to put in for a transfer to a real position? Somewhere you can actually make a difference. Must be pretty damn boring sitting in the Pentagon all day pushing paper." There it was, the annual public dismissal of my life's work. He had reduced my career, my sacrifices, my secret victories to nothing. He wasn't asking a question. He was passing a verdict. I felt a wall of ice forming around my heart, a defense mechanism perfected over decades. "I like my work, Ethan," I said with perfect calm. But inside, the ice was becoming something else. No longer just a shield, but a fortress. Standing at the gate with the guard's dismissive words, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside," time seemed to slow. The politeness made it worse, the professional tone that said this wasn't personal when everything felt deeply, excruciatingly personal. Then through the suffocating air, a new sound emerged, the quiet purr of a government-issued black sedan. The car glided to a stop, and General Miller emerged in full dress uniform. In the morning sun, the 4 stars on his shoulders seemed to burn with their own light. He saw me frozen, the flustered guard, my family watching from a distance. He ignored them, his focus a laser beam aimed at me. When he smiled, it was with genuine warmth. "There you are, Admiral Hayes," he said, his voice carrying easy authority. "We were about to send out a search party." Admiral Hayes. The words shattered the silence. You could see the gears grinding in the young petty officer's head. Confusion, then comprehension, then raw panic. He had nearly ejected a flag officer from a Naval Academy event. "Admiral, ma'am, my deepest apologies," he stammered, snapping into a salute so sharp it was a miracle he didn't dislocate his shoulder. He threw himself at the gate controls, swinging the barrier open with desperate urgency. General Miller placed a guiding hand on my elbow, leaning in. "Are you all right, Sophia? Do I need to go have a word?" My gaze drifted to the 3 people who were my blood. They were staring, mouths agape, utterly bewildered. The old Sophia screamed inside me to say yes, make them see, make them understand. But that girl had died on this spot minutes ago. I turned back to the general, the fortress of ice around my heart now complete. "That won't be necessary, General. I have a feeling they'll figure it out on their own today." This was the crossroads. I wouldn't give them a confrontation or chance to prepare. I wanted to see their unfiltered reactions without any help from me. "As you wish, Admiral," General Miller said with pure respect. He escorted me through the gate with purpose, directly toward the reserved VIP seating. Our route took us past where my family sat. I kept my chin high, eyes fixed forward, granting them no glance. But I felt their gaze like a physical force. As we passed, I heard a choked whisper from my father. "Admiral." That one word, spoken in utter disbelief by the man who had dismissed my life's work, was the final drop. The glass didn't just fill, it shattered. General Miller led me to a private waiting room behind the main stage. Take a moment, Admiral. The ceremony begins in 15. He closed the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the faint sounds of the brass band tuning up. I walked to the full-length mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger, yet more myself than I had ever been. With practiced precision, I slipped off the beige trench coat, the civilian armor I had worn so long. Beneath was the crisp, immaculate service dress whites. From a small velvet box, I retrieved my rank insignia, 2 silver stars for each shoulder board. With slow, methodical movements, I affixed them. Each click was decisive confirmation. This is who I am, this is what I have earned. I was no longer just Sophia Hayes, the quiet daughter. I was Rear Admiral Hayes, a flag officer in the most powerful navy in the world. When I stepped back into the VIP section, senior officers spotted me. "Admiral Hayes," the Vice Admiral said, extending his hand. I heard they were finally declassifying Blackwater. "Phenomenal work. Congratulations." Each handshake, each word of praise from these men who understood the sacrifices, was like a brick in the foundation of my confidence, a stark contrast to the cold, confused stares from the guest section. I took my assigned seat next to General Miller and allowed myself to feel the weight of their gaze. I could picture the scene. My father whispering urgently, my mother fanning herself with the program, and Ethan staring with focused bewilderment at the 2 silver stars on my shoulders, the impossible truth of them. I met his gaze briefly across the crowd, offering nothing more than a calm, polite nod. Then I turned my attention back to the stage. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a pawn. Today I was the queen, about to checkmate them all. The master of ceremonies stepped to the podium. "Now for the presentation of the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal to Lieutenant Ethan Hayes for meritorious service in support of combat operations." I watched as my brother rose with fluid confidence, a man who had never questioned his place in the world. He ascended the stage, accepted his medal with practiced humility, and turned to the microphone as if born for the spotlight. His acceptance speech was flawless, thanking the Navy, his commanding officers, then turning his charismatic gaze toward our family. "I want to thank my father, Captain David Hayes," he said. His voice rang with sincerity, "for teaching me what it means to be a warrior, for showing me the path of duty, honor, and courage." He smiled warmly at my mother. To my mother Margaret for her unending support and prayers. He gave a charming wink to his wife. And of course to my beautiful wife Jessica for being my rock, my anchor in every storm. He paused, letting the weight of his gratitude settle over the room. His eyes swept across the audience like a king surveying his court. For a fraction of a second, his gaze passed directly over me sitting in the front row of the VIP section. There was no recognition, no emotion, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. It was as if he were looking at a piece of furniture, a stranger, a seat filler. Then he continued, concluding with a patriotic flourish that earned thunderous applause. He never mentioned my name. That very public, deliberate omission in front of hundreds of his peers and our nation's most respected leaders was his final definitive statement. "You do not exist." It was a deeper cut than any private insult, an erasure on public record, a final declaration of my irrelevance. As he walked off the stage soaking in adoration, I felt the last flicker of sisterly sentiment extinguish, leaving behind nothing but cold, hard clarity. When the applause faded, General Miller did not return to his seat. With quiet purpose that drew every eye, he walked to the podium. The auditorium fell into sudden, expectant silence. A 4-star general going off script was an event in itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice commanding the air, "we have a special, unscheduled addition to today's ceremony. A recognition that for paramount reasons of national security has been kept secret until this very moment." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Ethan lean over and whisper to my father, confusion creasing his brow. General Miller continued, painting a vivid picture for the captivated audience. "We often honor the heroes we can see, the warfighters on the front lines, the pilots in the sky, the sailors on the seas. But there is another kind of hero, one who serves in the deepest shadows, whose victories are measured not in territory gained but in tragedies averted, in lives saved. Their battlefield is a global network of whispers, data, and secrets. The air was thick with anticipation. The audience leaned forward, completely under his spell. Today, the general boomed, his voice resonating with fierce pride, we have the distinct honor of finally recognizing the commander of the now declassified Operation Blackwater, one of the most successful intelligence operations in modern Navy history. I could hear my father's voice, a hoarse rasp carrying across the aisle. Blackwater? What the hell is Blackwater? General Miller's gaze lifted from the crowd until it landed directly on me. He held my gaze, a spotlight in human form, and a small smile touched his lips. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor to ask her to the stage, Rear Admiral Sophia Hayes. For a single heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The world hung suspended in stunned disbelief. Then, like a brush fire, whispers swept through the auditorium. Admiral Hayes? Did he say Rear Admiral? I rose from my seat. As I did, something extraordinary happened. Every single uniformed person in that room, from the youngest ensign to the most decorated generals, rose to their feet as one. It wasn't planned or coordinated. It was reflex born of instinct, protocol, and lifetime discipline. It was respect, a cascading wave of white and blue uniforms standing in silent deference. Except for 3 people. My family remained seated, frozen as if turned to stone. They were a tiny isolated island of shock in a vast rising sea of honor. My father's face was pure incomprehension, my mother's hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning horror. And Ethan, his confident tan had vanished, replaced by a pale, sickly pallor. I walked toward the stage with steady, deliberate steps. I could feel the weight of my own power, the quiet, immense authority I had carried in secret for so long. I was no longer a shadow. I was walking into the light. On stage, General Miller took the Distinguished Service Medal from its velvet box. As he pinned it to my uniform, he leaned in, his voice a whisper meant only for me. Time to tell your story, Admiral. He turned back to the microphone but did not simply read the official citation. He told the story. He spoke of the youngest Rear Admiral in modern naval history, a ghost who had commanded a global intelligence network from the shadow world. He spoke of strategic victories that averted regional wars, of intel that directly saved over 5,000 civilian lives in a single year. He painted a picture of warfare fought not with guns but with intellect. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. Just last year, it was actionable intelligence gathered and analyzed in real time by Admiral Hayes's unit that directly resulted in a U.S. destroyer being saved from a catastrophic coordinated anti-ship missile ambush in the Persian Gulf. I let my eyes drift to my family and watched the truth detonate in their faces. My father looked physically struck, his body rigid, eyes seeing something far away. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. But it was Ethan's face I will remember forever. The blood drained completely, confusion replaced by sickening comprehension. He knew exactly which destroyer that was. It was his. The applause felt like a distant ocean roar. Standing on that stage with the weight of the medal on my chest and the respect of my peers surrounding me, I felt profound release. The battle was over. The truth was out. At the reception that followed, I was no longer a shadow but a center of gravity. A group of congressmen were congratulating me when I saw them approach, my family moving like a wounded animal, a tight defensive cluster cutting through the crowd. Ethan was in the lead, his face a hard mask of fury. They stopped a few feet away. The congressmen, sensing the temperature drop, politely excused themselves. Rear Admiral Hayes, Ethan said, his voice a venomous hiss. He spat the title like a curse. That was quite a performance. You lied to us. You lied to all of us for 15 years. You let us believe you were nothing, a failure. General Miller caught my eye across the room and gave a subtle signal. A young lieutenant commander appeared at my elbow. Admiral, perhaps this conversation would be more comfortable in the private conference room. In the soundproofed room with the door closed, Ethan's rage finally exploded. Why? He yelled, his voice cracking. He paced like a caged tiger. Why would you do that to us? You turned your own family into a laughingstock. You stood by and let me lecture you about sacrifice, about service. You were laughing at me the whole time, weren't you? He spun to face me, eyes wild with wounded pride. I was on the front lines. Dad was on the front lines. We served, and you sat in a goddamn air-conditioned office playing war games on a computer, and you get a medal bigger than both of ours combined. It's insulting. His words were a desperate attempt to rebuild the pedestal he'd been knocked from. He wasn't angry that I had lied. He was angry that I was more successful. He was angry that my desk job had saved his life. I let him vent. I let the storm of his ego break against the calm fortress I had become. I poured a glass of water and took a deliberate sip, waiting until his shouting subsided into ragged breaths. I was never laughing at you, Ethan, I said, my voice quiet and controlled. I was doing my job, a job that by its nature required absolute secrecy. I shifted my gaze to my father. Did you ever once ask me about the specifics of my work, Dad? Or did you just assume it was paper pushing because it didn't involve a weapon? I turned to my mother. Did you ever once ask me if I was happy with my career, Mom? Or did you just ask when I was going to get married? I looked at all of them, the jury of my childhood. I didn't lie to anyone. I simply stopped trying to explain myself to people who had already decided they weren't going to listen. The silence that followed was absolute. My father seemed to shrink before my eyes. He bowed his head, and for the first time in my life, he looked old, defeated. The sharp ring of my encrypted satellite phone cut through the silence. I glanced at the screen. I have to take this. It's a call I can't miss. I walked toward the door, pausing with my hand on the handle, my back to them. I love you, I said, the words feeling foreign but necessary. But I will not be dismissed by you ever again. If we are going to have a relationship from this day forward, it will be one that starts with respect. Real respect. Think about it. I walked out, closing the door softly behind me, leaving them alone in the echoing silence of the truth. 6 months passed. 6 months of careful, tentative steps across a newly drawn map. My ultimatum wasn't a finish line. It was a starting line for a different kind of relationship. I walked into my parents' living room on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The first thing I noticed was something new against the far wall, a beautiful glass-fronted display cabinet made of dark cherry wood. My father was there, carefully polishing the glass. His own medals and my grandfather's were arranged on the lower shelves, but in the center at eye level sat my Navy Distinguished Service Medal, flanked by a framed photograph of me on stage with General Miller. My mother came in from the kitchen carrying warm chocolate chip cookies. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Your father built that last month, she said softly. He said it was the first time the Hayes family display case told the whole story of service. Not the story of the men, not combat versus support. Just service. It was a small change in wording, a subtle shift in family narrative, but it felt as significant as moving a continent. That evening, dinner was different. The air was lighter, the usual performance gone. There were no exaggerated war stories, no bravado. Instead, my father looked at me across the table. Sophia, what are the biggest challenges you face with personnel management at the Pentagon? With that many high-level civilians and officers, the politics must be complex. It was a real question, born of genuine curiosity. Later, Ethan talked about a new risk analysis protocol he was implementing. It's funny, he said, not quite meeting my eye. Some of the principles, I feel like I learned them from somewhere. He glanced at me with a shy, almost embarrassed smile. It was his way of acknowledging my world, admitting its value without saying the words directly. My mother raised her wine glass. A toast, she said, her voice clear and steady. Not to the men of the family, but to the strength and intelligence of all the Hayes children, in all their forms. We all clinked glasses. The oppressive competitive tension that had defined every family meal was gone, replaced by quiet, fragile, but very real warmth. After dinner, Ethan and I found ourselves on the old wooden swing on the back porch. For a long time we sat in comfortable silence, listening to crickets. "I'm sorry, Sophia," he said finally, his voice low and devoid of arrogance. "The way I treated you, the things I said about your work, it was never about you. It was about me. I needed to be the hero. I was so insecure that I couldn't stand to see that you had found your own way, a way I didn't understand." His confession was healing medicine for a wound I didn't know was still bleeding. I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. "Thank you for saying that, Ethan. For the longest time I thought I needed this family's approval to feel whole. I thought my value was something you all had to give me." I placed a hand over my heart. "But all those years of being misunderstood taught me something more important. My worth isn't determined by anyone else. It's right here. It always was. Having you all finally see it, that's a gift, a wonderful gift. But it's not a prerequisite anymore." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'm really proud to be your brother, Sophia." And for the first time, I could say it and mean it with every fiber of my being. "I'm proud to be your sister." The peace I felt in that moment wasn't victory. It was something better. It was acceptance. It was a dawn I had made for myself.